on that dark, foggy and gunpowder-scented European morning of 1914, while diplomats clinked champagne glasses and generals shifted their pawns across maps, the real great crime was being perpetrated leagues away from the trenches, in the depths of those sealed vaults where gold reserves were guarded and in the complex accounting ledgers that no one dared to look at. Thus today, as economic Sherlock, we pull our magnifying glass down from the dusty shelves and return to that crime scene where history's greatest, bloodiest, and most organized financial heist was committed because World War I, contrary to what textbooks tell you, was not merely a struggle for land and honor, but in fact a massive operation where the genetic codes of the global financial system, money's link to reality, and the future savings of humanity were executed overnight. The first and most vital victim of this case was the gold standard, the monument of integrity and the unshakable anchor of global trade of that era. Until the summer of 1914, a banknote was not just a piece of paper but a promise to pay the bearer physical gold upon demand. Yet when that insatiable beast of war spending awoke, all governments from London to Berlin, from Paris to Istanbul, tore up this sacred vow in a single stroke, transforming money into an unimaginary illusion based solely on the state's promise of victory. Let us now focus on the first major player in this global criminal network, Great Britain, specifically the City of London, the financial godfather of the time. Before 1914, Britain was the world's largest creditor, the absolute sovereign of global trade, and an empire where the pound sterling was seen as more valuable than gold. But when the daily cost of war skyrocketed to £6 million, the British aristocracy and financial circles were forced into the most tragic liquidation process history has ever seen. The British government, by forcing its people to buy war bonds, turned patriotic sentiment into a borrowing tool, effectively mortgaging the future labor of its own citizens and, when that was not enough, reached out to the newly rising power across the ocean, the United States, and handed over the title of world banker to giant financial institutions like JP Morgan on a silver platter. France, another accomplice in the crime, utilized the saving habits that its people had carried as a genetic heritage for centuries as a weapon. With those famous yet toxic posters reading "Your gold fights for victory, law combat pour le victoire," the French government persuaded ordinary peasants and workers to bring in their physical gold from under their mattresses and receive in return pieces of paper whose value eroded every single day. A manipulation so profound that when the war ended, the French people were left with a massive zero and a spiral of unpayable debt to the state, effectively liquidating the middle class through this financial assassination. Yet, one of the most tragic files in the case is undoubtedly Russia. Though Imperial Russia appeared to possess massive gold reserves on paper, it could not withstand the financial burden of the war due to the fragility of its banking system and the weakness of its industry, becoming a literal debt slave through heavy interest-bearing loans taken from its ally France, while defeats on the front lines pulverized the value of the ruble and the anger of people in breadlines was actually a revolutionary fire fueled by inflation and economic bankruptcy, meaning the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution was not just an ideological explosion but the financial suicide of an empire whose balance sheet had burst and whose money had turned to dust. And when Lenin came to power, he delivered history's first major default blow to the global financial system by rejecting all foreign debts. Turning to the Ottoman Empire, the empire had already been placed in the guise of a sick man with its hands and feet bound by that financial shackle known as the Decree of Muharrem Donu Umami when it entered this war. Yet true Sherlocks know that the Ottomans were not merely sick, but systematically robbed. The seizure of the ships Regatta and Sultan Osman, which had been paid for in advance with the pennies saved from the people's wedding jewelry and children's piggy banks, was not just a military strategy but the greatest theft committed against a state's financial honor. When the Ottomans were forced to circulate Evroquois necktie banknotes printed by their German allies, which had no real backing to finance the war, the people of Anatolia met a massive inflation monster for the first time in their history. Prices rose by 400 to 500% in just months. Paper money turned into worthless scraps in the eyes of the public. And by the end of the war, the Ottomans had lost not just their lands, but their economic independence and the final savings of their people in those dark accounting games. The true crime boss emerging from all this chaos was the United States. Watching the war as a debtor nation in 1914, the US, through J.P. Morgan and the Federal Reserve, which was established just at the onset of the war in 1913. Coincidence, you think? We built a massive credit mechanism that made all of Europe indebted to it, sold weapons, food, and raw materials to the Allies, pulled the majority of the world's gold reserves into the vaults of New York, and by the end of the war, the world had knelt before a single center, Wall Street. The modus operandi method of the crime for this gargantuan operation was the printing press. Instead of encouraging the public to revolt by increasing taxes, states chose inflation, a hidden tax on by printing money. They silently stole the purchasing power of the money in your pocket, a method so subtle that the victim only realizes they have been robbed after it is too late. The Treaty of Versailles, signed after the war, was not a document of peace, but in fact a document of financial torture. The 132 billion gold marks in reparations imposed on Germany was an impossible figure designed to make a country a debt slave for life, leading to the infamous hyperinflation disaster of 1923, where people carried worthless banknotes in wheelbarrows just to buy a loaf of bread. As we continue to gather evidence as Sherlock, the darkest picture we encounter is this. This process that began in 1914 reached its peak in 1933 with the Great Gold Robbery Executive Order 6102, where U.S. President Roosevelt confiscated all gold in the hands of the public with a single signature. When states are backed into a corner, the first things they sacrifice are always the people's property and the integrity of money. The fiat money system, unbacked money we use even today, is, in fact, a control mechanism invented in those bloody accounting rooms of the First World War. Every time central banks print money, every time the debt ceiling is raised, and every time inflation is announced, we are actually hearing the rhyme of that great crime of 1914. Remember, detectives' true wealth is not the numbers on the screen, but the ability to see through the system's illusions. Because history has shown us that those who detach money from reality eventually detach society from justice and peace. Therefore, as economic Sherlock, we will continue to follow the clues in this dark labyrinth, to expose the hidden culprits behind the balance sheets. And in our next case, we will open the cover of that massive, breathtaking file, The Economics of Crime, How Criminals Make Billions Every Year, where we will examine in the finest detail how crime is organized, not just at the state level but in the billion-dollar gears of the underworld, how dark networks wash money, and how the criminal economy governs global markets. Until then, take care of your wallet, your savings, and most importantly, your mind. Never let go of your magnifying glass, and always follow the money, because the truth is always hidden in the details.